Hello, everybody. Welcome back live to Philo Sapiens, where religion meets reason. And I'm back again with Martin. And that means it's an English stream. And what we're going to do is we're going to run the same. I don't know if you were with us last time. That was, I think, 13th of April, I suppose, when Kelly and I took up a video clip of Mohammed Hijab talking to some young guy. And they were dealing with some arguments, basically. And I think the last question that Mohammed Hijab asked was, "What's your stick with Islam? Basically, why don't you like it in a sense of what your argument is against it, basically, right?" And that's the conversation was going on at that point. And that young philosopher, I think he seems to be aware with philosophy. I think Madan, and so he said, problem of throwing somebody who does not believe in God for an eternity in hell, basically. That was something that I remember vaguely, basically. But I think he's gonna expand on that, basically, right? And
Okay.
so, first thing first, welcome, and how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I've not been in these streams in maybe in a week now, so I was a little busy over the weekend. So
Yeah, I
unfortunately,
think last time we did an English stream, probably for the very first time that Kali and I did a stream, that was not a Hindi Urdu stream, basically, right?
yes, and yeah, I was kind of busy at the time, so I was unable to attend. But let's see. Let's see. I'm coming into this discussion with hijab and this other person into the in the middle of things, so I might not understand fully the context, but most likely I think I'll be able to figure it out. But then we'll go from there. Yep.
Sure. All right. Let's add that to the screen and see. I think up until this part we covered in our part one. So those who are joining us for the very first time, or maybe haven't seen the last stream on 13th of April, we have covered. Kylie and I have covered until this part. That is 35-minute, 15-second part of the. And you can find the description of the video in our. I mean, link for the video in our description section, and you can go and listen to it individually if you want. And I would recommend that you do listen to it, because anybody's video that we critique, we always thank them by saying that, okay, to our viewers, that go and watch their stream as well from their channel. So that's our give back to them, basically payback, if you want to call it that way.
Okay.
So anyways, without further ado, I think, Madin, we shall start, right?
Yeah.
Morally
Cool.
false. What's your standard?
So you look. So what you do is you look at the things that are really ethically obvious, the things that seem really obviously the case in ethics, and then you look at whether sort of the balance of those favor or disfavor a claim. So if a claim, so suppose I say it's great to torture people.
Madan, should I rewind it a little bit for you to get the context, or you got it? He got what is your basically you got the point, right?
I kind of no. What did he say? I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure.
I'll rewind it probably 30 seconds or so, 40 seconds,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
That's unfair.
It's not an aesthetic judgment.
So what is it? Yeah, based on what?
Well,
There's pits of the hellfire. كلما نضجت جلودهم بدلناهم جلودا غيرها ليذوقوا العذاب. That every time their skins fall off, we have replaced them with skins that are actually different to their skins, so that they can taste the punishment. But in the same exact chapter that Allah says that, which is chapter 4, Allah also mentions ما يفعل الله بعذابكم إن شكرتم وآمنتم. That what would Allah do with your punishment if you are grateful and you are believers? So in other words, it's making it clear that there is a justification for the punishment, which is the ingratitude, the ultimate ingratitude of the human condition or the human being, the disbeliever, and the ultimate disbelief of the two things, which this verse indicates are the justifications for someone in hellfire forever. Now, you might think that that's unfair in your mind, but then that's a subjective value judgment. That's an aesthetic value judgment. There's no way of proving that's unfair.
It's not an aesthetic judgment.
So what is it? Yeah, based on what?
Well, based on the same things all moral judgments are based on, which is ultimately some combination of seemings, some combination of direct seemings and efforts to make other beliefs that are based on seemings coherent.
Okay, it seems like your philosophy of logic and maths is much stronger than your ethics, because here you're not giving a good account of your ethical system.
I know way more about ethics than about philosophy.
Oh, well, tell me now why. On what basis? First of all, you have to explain what is your ethical system.
Understand, the question you're asking me is the question you ask about any ethical claim that a person makes.
How can you ascertain that a claim is ethically or morally false? What's your standard?
So what you do is you look at the things that are really ethically obvious, the things that seem really obviously the case in ethics, and then you look at whether sort of the balance of those things favor or disfavor the claim. So if a claim, so suppose I say it's great to torture people, okay? You can all be really confident that that claim is false because it's really obvious that that claim is false.
No, but
in fact, it being obvious that claim is false is more obvious than any argument.
No, but here's the thing.
I'm not saying it's subjective. I'm saying we know. No, it's not subjective. Is it subjective?
No, but here's the thing.
It's objectively wrong.
No, but the issue is that you're.
All right, so Martin, you got the gist of it. What he's arguing, basically, right? So, okay, he's arguing, where is your ethical system? How can you say that the people who will be burning in hell, it's that punishment is not just, basically, right? Mm-hmm. And so this young kid, sorry, I shouldn't call him kid, but young philosopher, whoever he is, I think he's making a point from strong intuitions. I think I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong here, and. In my mind, probably he in a sense he's right, but there is another way to put it. Why is torturing young kids and gouging out their eyes and all this is wrong? Is because of the inherent nature of the suffering, basically, right? I mean, someone could claim that the inherent nature of suffering is such that you just can't. I mean, it disallows you. You think that it is wrong, basically, to torture someone, to make someone suffer so much so that they writhe in pain, basically. So it's the intrinsic nature of suffering itself that says it's wrong to torture someone, and there could be other ways to justify it as well. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, let's see what this man is saying. The other guy is saying first. Right.
You're not.
I don't. Why I stop in between is because I don't want to run it for like 5 minutes and then you keep coming and tagging it to say that, hey, it's illegal, remove it. Right.
It's not illegal, but go on, carry on.
No, I mean, they won't say illegal, but you can't monetize it. Basically, it's a problem with monetization. If you just don't monetize, then there's no problem with it.
All right, carry on. Yeah.
You're not proposing a mechanism. So, for example, in Western ethical systems, there are three main schools of thought. One of them is the Kantian deontological school, which I'm sure you know, which is, for example, underpinned by something like the categorical imperative and or the hypothetical imperative. Then you've got consequentialism, okay, under which falls utilitarianism and under which is actually liberalism or social liberalism, because social liberalism is the birth child, actually, of utilitarianism. Of course, John Stuart Mill was both. He was the father of social liberalism and utilitarianism. Then you've got virtue ethics of the ancient Greeks. These are the three, and of course, Alistair McIntyre has written a book, an interesting one, about after ethics. And I actually believe of all the acts of virtue, I actually believe that, my opinion is, the best things the Westerners actually brought in terms of ethical systems is actually virtue ethics, rather than the other two, which is ironic because it's regressed, in my view, as is the view of Alistair McIntyre as well. But the point I'm making to you is this, is that these three systems are giving you a reason why things are right and wrong. So, for example, Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics will talk to you about excesses and deficiencies, and then the golden mean. If you're a coward, that's bad. If you're hasty, that's bad. Being brave is right in the middle. He's giving you something to think about. Consequentialists will do the same thing. They'll say that we look at something being bad and right based on the consequences it has on society. The ontological ethics, or Kant, will say, if everyone does something in society, we can see if that thing is right or wrong. Right, but here, you're not proposing a mechanism.
So you can, of course, get, so suppose someone's torturing babies and you want to argue they're doing something wrong. It would not be the right way to go to say, okay, first virtue ethics is right. Oh, and then virtue ethics implies that you shouldn't torture babies. And the reason why that wouldn't be the way to go is that it's way more obvious that it's wrong to torture babies than any particular view of normative ethics. A view of normative ethics would be way more controversial than the idea that it's wrong to torture babies. Fine. Now, in a similar way, like, when Peter Singer is arguing that for ethical vegetarianism, he doesn't say, okay, premise one, utilitarianism is right, and then if utilitarianism is right, then we have an obligation.
He does kind of.
Animals. No, he doesn't do that.
He might not do it in that way. He's definitely utilitarian.
I agree. Peter Singer is utilitarian.
And we know.
All right. So one of the things I want to point out here, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong here, is that Mohammed Hijab tends to think, and maybe he said something like there are three main systems of ethics, basically in Western philosophy, and he cited virtue ethics, deontology, and consequentialism, basically, right? And I think that is not right. There are other systems as well, and that he didn't even care to mention, basically. I think care ethics is one, contractualism is one. I'm not quite sure where. Maybe I misheard him saying something very specific that that only three fell into that category. So yeah, Madan,
No,
have you finished?
yeah, no, no, I'm not feeling as though I need to comment yet. I just don't feel as though they've talked enough. Let them speak speak a little bit more to get some juice into this.
But do you think? I just wanted to catch him misrepresent the Western philosophy, right? So do you think there are only three systems of ethical?
I think he said
there are
three
only
main. I think he said
three
three
main.
main. Yeah, and
All right.
therefore it might be a bit different. He's not necessarily saying there are just three systems. If you want to rewind, I don't want you to go and rewind the tape. Maybe I misheard him, but I think he was trying to.
I think I heard main as well. I think probably three main systems. I don't know. Deontology is main system. Maybe yes. Virtue ethics. I think majority is consequentialism. Basically, if you want to say, then majority is like consequentialist. Anyway, all right. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt.
No, that is
You're not getting it.
Yeah.
I agree. Peter Singer is utilitarian.
Sure.
In fact, I was, sort of like that fact is essential to my point. But when Peter Singer's arguing for, say, our obligations to give nearly all of our wealth to charity or the wrongness of meat eating, he does not argue for it by saying premise one, utilitarianism is correct.
But why does he have to do it in that systematic fashion?
Well, he doesn't even do it in the West systematic fashion.
No, but
what he does is he appeals to obvious ethical
But Peter
that
Singer,
are even going to be shared by the ontologists and virtue ethicists.
Yeah.
And then he argues that those obvious ethical judgments imply.
what was his view on disabled babies again? That he could kill them or something, right?
Yeah. Well,
I don't know. I don't want to misrepresent him, but the point is that you can assume that he's making these value judgments based on the fact that he has an ethical system which has justified this. Now, what you're essentially doing is you're negating the principle of sufficient reason, because we're saying that the question at hand here is, do moral truths need a sufficient reason to be either true or false? If you're saying that, for example, if you say killing a baby, why is it wrong? It's wrong because, and then there's a reason that someone can give. You're saying that you don't need to actually offer a justification.
No, I'm not saying you don't need to offer a justification. Well, I mean, actually, I would, like, it depends on exactly what you mean by a justification, but I think you have to give a sufficient reason for it. But often the obviousness of a principle itself can be a sufficient reason for it.
Okay, no, but that's not a reason, actually.
Hold on. So this does not deny this principle of sufficient reason, because I'm not making a claim about ontology. I'm not saying that there are ethical truths that simply float freely.
Then you're not making it.
Sorry,
I apologize.
So what I'm saying is that the way we figure out proximate ethical judgments is not by first figuring out a grand theory of morality and then deriving all the ethical judgments from the grand theory. Instead, what it makes sense to do is you look at obvious mid-level principles. So there are going to be obvious. So for example, if you're arguing for utilitarianism, you might say, here's a really obvious ethical judgment: the better than relation is transient. So A is better than B, and B is better than C, and A is better than C. And then you point out that there are sort of these tricky cases where non-utilitarian views will either have to violate transitivity or some other plausible ethical principle. Right. So you don't start with the broad ethical framework and then use it to derive all the proximate first order judgments. If anything, it often goes the other way, where you start with first order judgments and then you look at the most plausible ethical view for systematizing the correct first order.
So are you saying that when you start with, in your estimation, when you're starting with these judgments, are you doing so on an epistemological level? Is it an epistemological value judgment? Sure. So then you have the is-ought fallacy then.
No.
Yes, you do, because you're basically saying that if you conceive of something as wrong, then it must be wrong. It ought to be wrong. There must be a mechanism by which. How do you get from epistemology to ontology?
Here's an analogous argument. Okay, how do I determine that there's grass there? Well, I look and I see there's grass. I don't first figure out a broad theory of how perception works and then say, this broad theory of perception implies that there's a vertical relationship between me seeing the grass and the grass being there. You don't start with a grand theory. You start with obvious first order judgment, and then if anything, you build a grand theory out of there. Now, it's not the is-ought fallacy any more than it would be the grass perception grass fallacy to say, well, I perceive that there's grass, and so from this I infer there's grass. That's not saying that the perception that there's grass and the fact that there's grass are the same thing.
How do you know that your perception is correct? What you consider to be painfully obvious, yeah? How do you know it's painfully obvious? How do you know? How do you prove it?
Well, you get exactly analogous problems in any area where you perceive anything. I see X. Oh, how do I know X is really there? There might be other people who didn't perceive it.
You're saying something is painfully obvious. How do you prove that it's painfully obvious?
Well, so normally, I think that if something seems painfully obvious to you, you have reason to trust that it is, in fact, painfully obvious, unless there's some reason to doubt it. Now, this reason to doubt it might be, for instance, in the form of there being, strong arguments against it from other things that are obvious to most people. It might be in the form of lots of other people not sharing the intuition. It might be in the form of some thinking account, some possible evolutionary story of why you might have come to form the judgment, even if the judgment were not in fact true.
No, but you see, once again,
sorry,
the issue is
there anything? So suppose the Quran had said, it's great to torture babies. You should just go around torturing babies for fun all the time. Would that be a good reason to reject the truth of the Quran?
If the Quran had said that, it's not. I would say that it would have to give a principle for why. If it does so as a
So let's
just like that without any reason, then there would be, because it goes back to whether you can actually prove something is true or false before the revelation goes down. So there are two.
Before he moves on to that topic, I think there's more juice now in what the atheist interlocutor, I assume he's an atheist, is saying. Don't you think?
Yes, go for it.
Yeah. So I think what he's basically saying is that instead of starting off with a grand theory first, or starting off with a normative theory, ethical theory, where we start with an equation or algorithm, and then from that we generate moral rules, etc. We instead evaluate the theories using our certain ethical obvious. In this context, he might be referring to what people call his intuitions, maybe ethical intuitions or something, and kind of that is what is the standard way of how a lot of moral philosophy operates. So let me just say that this is more investigative rather than conclusive, right? So,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's more investigative in the sense of the following. So what moral philosophy does, or moral philosophers do, is they come out with maybe like a theory, and then they test the robustness of the theory by looking at its outcomes. And by its outcomes, then they reassess the theory, basically, saying that is this leading to what we really consider to be ethical. Right now, when I say this is investigative, I'm really putting that caveat in there. It's investigative.
And it could be just a armchair investigation as well. I mean,
yes, exactly.
In a pure sense, basically. Yeah.
The reason I'm saying is investigative, and I'm emphasizing that caveat, because otherwise it might seem like circular reasoning, right, or some sort of confirmation bias, right, where if you come out with a theory, as long as you can just reject the outcomes of the theory, then you can support your alternative theory, maybe the one that you kind of like, or the one that you for no reason really at all. There's no real kind of firm equations to morality. It's just that we look at the equations and we judge the equation by its outcomes. Right, and if you do that in any other sphere, you may think that's kind of cheating, right? Like you might think that you're just being circular in the sense that you're begging the question. You're assuming that the theory is wrong. Maybe the theory is correct, and you've got it wrong. So how do you go about it? Well, that's not what moral philosophers are necessarily doing. What moral philosophers are doing is that they're trying to kind of figure out what is the best sort of epistemology, what's the best sort of investigative tool to get down to the bottom of figuring out what are the best algorithms. So let's say one algorithm is a consequentialist algorithm. Let's assume the consequentialist algorithm is like Jeremy Bentham's utilitarian calculus or something very simple. And let's say that leads to a situation where you can justify raping and killing people in order to make the world happier. Right? Now, the outcome of this hedonistic calculator leads to maybe genocides, right, in order to increase happiness of society.
Right.
And what people do, moral philosophers do, is they look at the outcome and go, wait a minute, something is going wrong here, right?
It's betting against the baser intuitions, probably, and that's something that this guy is talking about from the very beginning, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's going against. So if it's the case that you can kill a child, torture a child just for fun under certain constraints under Jeremy Bentham's calculus, it might be permissible. For if it increases net happiness, right? If there's three people on an island and there's one child, and the three people derive great pleasure from battering the child up, then Jeremy Bentham's kind of very rudimentary calculus, right? And that's not the only way of having utilitarianism, by the way. But the reason we have the various different ways of utilitarianism is precisely because it leads to that conclusion. And so people then go, all right, let's go back to the drawing board. Clearly, we're doing something wrong here, right? Now, that might seem like it's subjective. What moral philosophers or moral ethicists are doing, they're not making conclusions that their intuitions are correct. They're trying to figure out why is there this tension, right? Maybe those intuitions, and this is where I come in, where I think those intuitions that we're having are not really intuition. There is another theory underlying it. So how I would analyze, this is me now, forget the two guys on the screen, how I would kind of analyze it is that just like in a science, for example, you come out with a theory, a hypothesis. If the hypothesis doesn't predict the data, you throw out the hypothesis and you start with a new hypothesis that does predict the data. Now, analogously, apply that in the sphere of ethics. You come out with a hypothesis. Ethics is Jeremy Bentham's utilitarian calculus. Does it really predict? It's not really a prediction, but does it fit the data? And it doesn't. It doesn't fit the data. And you throw out the hypothesis, and you keep adding different types of hypotheses and seeing whether or not it really predicts the data properly. Now, am I making conclusions? No, I'm being a scientist. I'm being an ethical scientist. And in that same sense of being a scientist in the physical sciences, I'm being an ethical scientist, trying to figure out which theory really supports the intuitions. Then, once you've solved that, then you no longer have intuitions. Then you can explain those intuitions with that theory. Right? And my particular theory is that it's actually a virtue ethicist sort of paradigm that fits better, right? Maybe with a mix of consequentialism, with a little bit of mix of deontology, right? As other people
Exactly,
have
yeah.
explained, has had me explain before, that I think they're analytical truths. Now, when I've explained it that way, I have given what Mohammed Hijab is talking about, a principle of sufficient reason type of reasoning, where I think it's a necessary truth, maybe, right? Like all bachelors are unmarried. A square can't be a triangle. You can't torture a baby and call it ethical, because ethical, by the meaning of the term ethical,
Hedonistic way, basically, yeah.
But there is a calculus there. There is an algorithm there. What's the algorithm? And I found out in my investigation that the algorithm is the best algorithm to describe these things are certain ethical kind of virtues, compassion, benevolence. That's what it kind of bottoms out. And people have heard my kind of moral theory in the past, how I explain it, and I say it's very similar to divine command theory, just without the person involved, right? In divine command theory, it's just a benevolent person. As long as a benevolent person says the right, commands the right thing according to his nature, which is benevolence, then it'll be moral. Well, I think the same thing, right? I just don't think it has to be baked into a deity. As long as a benevolent,
right.
Yeah, clearly on divine command theory, the theory is benevolence. I think if we go down Euthyphro, benevolence is the reason, and then similar that overlaps with my thinking as well. So the moral, what is the equation? That's the equation. Now I can debate Hijab about it, but that's how it is. So I think that's what I think the man in the blue t-shirt could strengthen his argument by saying that. But what he's doing is that he's trying to say that there's a perception, and he's right as well. Just like we have
he's right about it. He's just saying that it's my strongest intuition, and that's about it. But he can justify those intuitions based on whatever the other ethical theories are out there, and he can see which ones work well or not all works well in all situations. Pretty much, that's a fact. Basically, you'll have to mix and match. Basically, right? A little bit of deontology, a little bit of virtue ethic, maybe an ideal observer here or there, or something like that. A utilitarian perspective on others, maybe. So I think it's and the other problem I think for the theist, that is, and I think Mohammed Hijab, I don't know if he's a uh, if he's a divine command theorist or not. He's stuck with the same problem as the is-ought problem that he's accusing this guy of. I think he has the same problem as well. I mean, is-ought problem is a logical problem that just cannot be surmounted, whether it's coming from a command is coming from your God or from some ethical system that is different from sans God. Basically, you just
Yeah.
can't surmount it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the is-ought problem is applicable to every moral theory, including divine command theory. I mean, divine command theory kind of superficially creates the impression that it subverts the is-ought problem because it's coming out with a command that is independent to human beings and minds. And so on.
Right. Yeah.
It's illusory in the sense that no, it doesn't, because you first of all, it's not independent to any mind. If it's first of all the arbitrary horn. If it is, for example, on the in terms of Euthyphro, the independent horn, then you may be able to say it's independent to any person's personal preference.
Madin, can I stop you for a second? I think whether it's somewhere in this clip, probably before we started, somewhere, Mohammed Hijab, speaks. I mean, pronounces Euthyphro dilemma as something very weird, basically. And I'm thinking this guy is doing PhD in philosophy, I think. Yeah, I don't know what he says, but he doesn't say Euthyphro, basically, right?
How does he
And I
pronounce
said,
it?
come on, how long have you been studying philosophy for?
Yeah,
Anyway,
how does he pronounce it?
I totally forgot. He pronounced it something very weirdly. I mean, if you listen to it, you'll just catch it in a very
Okay.
Eurifro or something like that. He says Eurifro or something
I
like
think
that.
that's just his accent. I think it's just his accent. I wouldn't bother.
Okay. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Or sorry, I stopped you in between. What were you saying? I
Also,
think divine command
yeah.
theory and that Euthyphro's problem is if as you said, God is a mind, and basically when you say divine command theory, so there is always that matter of what you call subjective opinion over there, or subjectivity rather. Basically,
Yeah.
so
I
any
mean,
command that is coming from there is subjective in its essence, basically.
if it's arbitrary, if it's arbitrary to his preferences, if it's something that he has to adhere to, like a concept that is more deeply baked into some sort of framework, which might be like benevolence and compassion, then it might not be entirely subjective. But if somebody wants to push hard on the Euthyphro dilemma and just simply say, why should I follow? Why should I want to adhere to a standard such as a seemingly independent standard like compassion or something, or benevolence? Like you might, for example, say that there is once you have a goal to morality, there is you can derive seemingly objective outcomes or etc. Like, but somebody might push hard and say that any sort of goal can be subject to the is-ought problem, in the sense that I might not have the same goals. I ought not follow it because there is no oughtness to anything, right? There is no oughtness to wanting to. And somebody may say this by simply saying that they refuse to follow it, right? So even if I come out with like
Yeah,
the
a
Jeremy
description, in simple terms, a description cannot lead to prescription, basically. As simple
kind of,
as
yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah. So if you have like an equation saying the maximize happiness, meaning why should I follow that? If you have a ethical framework, say be the most virtuous person, which is to be charitable, why should I follow charity? But you can say the same thing. So how do they do this? The way to do this is simply by refusing, right? You can still do the refusal. You can still do the dissension. You can still do the denunciation when it comes to divine command theory. I just refuse to follow God. I just refuse to follow God's benevolence, right? I ought not. Where is the is ought gap being? How is it being? That chasm being broached? How are we leaping from one thing to another? Well, the is
And
ought
so,
problem is simply like if there's an argument, let's say torturing babies are bad, right? You have to smuggle in the oughtness into the argument, into the deductive argument. You can't derive the ought as a conclusion of the premises of
yeah,
the
and
argument.
as soon as somebody says, some theist comes and tells you that No, with divine command theory, if you don't follow God's command, you'll burn in hell, basically.
Mm.
And what they have done is, from divine command theory, they have swiftly jumped to a utilitarian kind of a theme,
It wouldn't
basically,
matter.
or ethical system, basically, in a sense,
They're not-
right?
that wouldn't even matter. That's a category mistake. We're not even talking about any of that. The Izod problem is a logical, philosophical problem. Threats can't subvert that.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I mean, threats
It's
can't
like
subvert that. I'm saying, no,
yeah.
I'm saying, yeah, that's a category mistake. But what they have done, they haven't surmounted the Izod problem. I'm not saying that they have, but what they have done is to justify their divine command theory, which can't surmount this
Yeah.
Izod problem.
Okay.
They have suddenly switched over from one ethical system to the other, basically, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, if the idea is that it'll make you happier to go to heaven, and that's just utilitarianism, but then why? But if the objection is that utilitarianism ought not be followed because there's no oughtness to it, then that still ought not be followed either. So the Hume's problem is still well alive there. And if it is the case that pleasure and happiness are sufficient to do that, then any sort of then why are you rejecting Bentham? Jeremy Bentham in the first place,
exactly.
right? I mean, if all it took was threats to make the Izod problem better, to solve the Izod problem, then in principle it can be solved as long as we can force ourselves onto people, right?
Right.
So
right.
So I can solve the Izod problem if I can somehow convince megalomaniacal individual, a tyrannical individual in great authority on this world to kind of impose his desires upon everyone else. And
yeah, exactly. I think this is the exact same example we used last time, I think, and said if Hitler were to conquer the whole world, and then he becomes the sole power, he can do whatever he wants, and he becomes like kind of a just second to God, pretty much, right? And whatever he commands, then would you believe it, basically, because from a utilitarian perspective, if whatever he says you do, then you get the goods, and would you do that? And yeah, I mean, that's the same thing, I think. Similar thing, I would say, not exactly the same thing, but similar thing.
Just to clarify, the Izod problem is that there is no oughts in the world, and it's hard to conceive of how there can be something binding of an ought, like from a description of the world, right? That there's trees, there's dogs, and that you ought to do something. You ought to, the ought seem to come from our passions and feelings, and they're not out there. You can go and find a rock, you can go and find some coal, you can go and find some trees. They're descriptive, but there is no oughtness in the world, right? Of the way something should be rather than the other way, right? Like you ought to cut your hair every year, right? That's kind of the Izod problem. I'm just illustrating the problem. I'm not saying that it's true. I think it's very strong indeed, but I'm just illustrating the problem. And if this problem is such that it's so strong that it refutes all forms of atheistic morality, unless you show how it doesn't also cut the throat of theistic morality, then it is similarly applicable to that as well, because because it doesn't matter how much power or doesn't matter how appealable something is. So if theism says that you will get $1 million if you do X, Y, Z, and you want to do it, but the Izod problem doesn't care about the outcomes or the temptations. The point is entirely that there is no, as David Hume illustrates, that there is no objective ought for me to save the world, rather to save the entirety of the world, even if brings great pleasure to me. If I just decided, for example, it's better for me to lift my if I just decided I'd rather just scratch my finger.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the yeah.
Right, and
that's Izod problem for you, basically. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, anybody who tells you from I have heard a lot of apologists saying that, oh yes, I mean, Izod problem can be surmounted if we have divine command theory and this and da 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 da. They are wrong. They are misleading you. It's a problem that you just cannot surmount, basically.
It's a logical problem. It's a logical
It's a
problem.
logical problem, right?
You can't surmount it through through temptations or deserts or threats, because if it's a logical problem, because I see it as trying to square a triangle,
And
no
power
matter
power cannot surmount it as well. I mean,
yeah.
so now talk about the power, infinitely powerful, basically.
Yeah.
Even the infinitely powerful cannot surmount this problem. This is because this is a logical problem, basically.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. So the strongest versions of it is that because people misunderstand it and think David Hume is trying to say that if he has a passion for scratching his finger over everything else, like to save the entire world, if he had the option and he just chooses to scratch his finger, then he's talking about his passions. And clearly, if there's a God, then it will cater to his passions more, that he would rather want to go to heaven and avoid hell, that he won't scratch his finger, but he will do the right thing and save the world, right? So clearly now that is our problem. But no, the strongest version of the problem is not merely just trying to tempt somebody away from their passions. The point is, no matter what passions you have, and even if you have great temptation to go to heaven or hell, avoid hell, right? The point is, strictly logically speaking, there is no oughtness to that. Real oughtness. That's just a subjective decision that you do make that is inside of your brain, because it's not out there independent to you, some real ought in the world saying that you have to obey God's dictates and choose to go to heaven. And even if it's very appealing, even if it convinced every single human being on the earth, on the world, including the psychopath, even if it convinced every single person, including the psychopath, that in fact, for them, it's more valuable to avoid hell and go to heaven and therefore follow these commands, it will still not bridge the Israel problem, because there aren't any mind-independent oughts, because oughts, by their very nature, are subjective, right? They exist amongst a society, right? And therefore, they're never mind-independent. If they're not mind-independent, therefore they're subjective. So yes, everybody can collectively think following divine command theory is better than anything else. Everybody can collectively.
But there's still no ought to it.
Yeah, because it's still subjective. There's no objective ought. So everybody's just making a subjective decision, right? And still in principle,
collectively making a decision, basically, right? And still a subjective decision. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So hijab has no way out of that. This is why I don't really deal with the Israel problem. I think see the problem with the likes of Mohammed Hijab and others in this arena, apologetics arena, is they think that they have the tool, and they have been fed. I don't know how they have been fed this idea that divine command theory somehow, because there's another apologist. He calls himself polemicist. Mahadin, you remember we were when we started this channel, we reviewed his debate with Haris Sultan, Kaisar Ahmed Raja's debate. So he's also that kind of person. He thinks only divine command theory can solve Azod problem, and I'm not quite sure where they have learned their philosophy from. Yeah, I need to understand that. Maybe I need to go and maybe ask him one day as to why he thinks that. They genuinely think if they can create a situation where subjectively it is everybody's desire to want to go to heaven, then they've solved the Azod problem, right?
If somebody is supposed to do something, that becomes the bridge is the gap between the bridge is surmounted. I think that's what they think. I don't know, but that's not how it is.
Yeah, but all divine command theory is just another person in this subjective kind of way. So in going by Hume, everything is subjective and it's just all passions. Then adding another subjective mind, which is God, is still God's passions and it's your passions, and you collectively agree and I had to do certain things, right? But even taking it on the level of subjectivity, if the idea was if you can just convince everybody subjectively to do one thing, right, then you have uniform goals or something, and you just bridge like I said, you don't really bridge the strict logical issue. But let's hypothetically forget that part for a minute. Let's just go with the idea that you can just collectively agree to want to follow God because it's passion, because all your passions align with that. You're tempted by heaven, you're discouraged by hell, and therefore it's in your best interest to not be a psychopath and just go around willy-nilly killing people, but to adhere to and submit to God's commands. And this creates this kind of illusion of bridging the is-or problem. Even that's not really met, because in principle, that sounds great to say it, right? But when presented with this, if the idea is that that's what you have to do, are you doing that? Are you getting people to that level of subjective agreement? You're not really, because there's plenty of people who if you, for example, tell a psychopath about heaven and hell, and they even genuinely believe it, they still don't emote that way and feel that way. They don't necessarily think about the long-term consequences of their behavior. They don't really care. They don't care if they're going to be burning in hell, and therefore they will still follow their own whims rather than submitting to this higher code. And you don't even have to be a psychopath. I know very strong believers of Islam or Christianity who do bad and crummy things, even though they know that God is watching, etc. So you're not getting this kind of robotic subservience. People still will choose to scratch their own finger rather than doing the right thing, right? They still would watch pornography, even though they know that they shouldn't be watching pornography.
Watch pornography, drink alcohol, do zina, whatnot. And Madin, can I stop you for a second? Guys, anybody who's listening and who's I hope more and more people will join. But see, I have made the link public, and we are here for a cordial conversation, unlike some other channels. I was at one channel, Basalat Adam's channel, and they have 7 or 8 guys in the panel, and they don't let you talk. They present misinformation. They distort the history. They don't present the history properly. They present some of the philosophical arguments as if they understand what it is. None of them has a background in academic philosophy, and just spit out some garbage over there. And I wanted to have a conversation with them, and they wouldn't even let me talk. Basically, they just, like, one after the other, they just kept talking and then saying, no, our intention was not to talk about history. Right? I said, come on, guys. I mean, if you want to be diligent about talking a subject, at least apologize for it, that you were mistaken and you misrepresented. Apologize, because now I have told you the right history and all those things. And they won't even do that. So this is the level of dishonesty that these guys espouse, basically. Anyways, so I have made the link public. Anybody who wants to join can come, join, have a cordial conversation. I think Suhail is listening to us. Suhail, if you want to join, I think I'm not quite sure whether you are an atheist or a theist. Whatever you are, I assure you, we'll have a cordial conversation here. We are not out to catch you or to insult you or anything. And that's always been the motto of this channel, right? We are here to critique an ideology, not the people who follow it. And that's true for every ideology that we critique, right? We critique Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, you name it, right? Mormonism, Buddhism, right? Sikhism. We don't know much about the later ones, by the way, but at least we try to be even-handed when we do critique them, right? And so you come here, we don't have any acts against you, pretty much, as such, but present your argument, find flaws in our arguments, and present to us, and then we'll have a conversation, cordial conversation. We can just disagree at our ideologies. That's about it. So anyways, Martin, shall we run forward with that? I think we're already at 43-minute mark, so maybe we go for another 15 minutes and then close it at 1 hour mark, right? Okay.
Yeah. So I think Sohel in the comments, I'm not sure what he's saying. I don't really understand what he's typing in tech.
I'm going to say, Sohel, if you want to join, come and join us, right? And then you probably will be able to express your ideas in a more clear. Right now, we are not understanding what you're trying to say. Maybe you come here and we'll help you spell it out better, if you want to do that, right? No pressure, but I think that's a better way to have a conversation.
Yeah.
All right, he's saying thank you both for the opportunity. I usually like to listen to people. No worries, but at least in the comment section, can you tell us what do you believe? Basically, what is your background?
I think he's a Muslim.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I could guess that, but I just wanted to, hear from the horse's mouth, basically.
Yeah.
All right,
So
no worries.
yeah. So yeah, in terms of what I was saying, what the atheist in the blue shirt was talking about, right? That it's like any sort of perception, and he might be correct in the sense that we do have, for example, the perception of the tree, and then we try and figure out what moral epistemological theory supports the idea that there is a tree there, right? But everybody kind of understands that there is a tree there, right? That's like a starting off point, and you may compare moral philosophy to be similar. That the idea of just beating up a child for no reason, right, is as obvious fact as there's a tree there, right? But why is there a tree there? That's when philosophy starts, and that's where philosophy starts for moral philosophy as well. Like beating up a child is wrong, but why am I thinking this, right? Is this real? Is this true, or is it just like a subjective belief? Or is it, is there some undergirding theory to explain that, right? If there's an alternative theory that says beating up a child is right, then clearly it clashes with this other kind of perception that I'm having, which is that it's wrong. So that's what the starting off point, and is investigative in nature. I want to put that caveat there strongly, rather than conclusive. Where some moral philosophers might just end it there by calling it ethical intuitions are just the conclusions. Whereas I think they're saying the same thing, just using different language. And I think the language of intuitions is more misleading because it creates some spooky vibe, right? Or it makes it sound subjective. Whereas I would say it's not. I wouldn't call it intuitions. I would say intuitions. They start off as intuitions, but then you investigate why I have these intuitions, what moral theory supports these intuitions, and then you sketch the theory that seems to be more aligned with what we mean by ethics, and that's kind of how you do it. And I submit you do all forms of epistemology, including non-moral philosophy, such as scientific epistemology, in very similar ways, right? Because you at rock bottom, you have to stop at some sort of perception. And why is that perception true? Simply because it is, in the sense that it is that is what we mean by reality, right? What we mean, like, why is the tree being there true? Well, that is just what we mean by true. If there's and then the correspondence theory of truth, then you arrive at that conclusion. See that? You start with the data, there's a tree, and then you figure out what theory best explains, what epistemological framework best explains this, right? And that, in my view, is the correspondence theory of truth. That if there's a perception, right, and that's the best perception, and it corresponds with the world, with this world, then that's
with the reality. Yeah, with the reality. And whatever. I think these, sometimes when you go deeper into these kind of subjects, it becomes, it starts to seem like then you're getting into circular things, basically. When you say, okay, it corresponds with the reality, then what is reality? And then you just keep asking the question same again. And then and that's why I think what Mahajan said is right. You, at some point, you have to bottom out, pretty much, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you'll have to say that, yes, this is the brute reality, or brute, this is what I believe, basically. That's the reality, if I see. Because otherwise, you're going to get into a tangle out of which you just won't be able to come out of.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. If you just stop at the correspondence theory of truth, somebody can say, why is that one true? And why is that one true? And what's the justification? And you keep going never ending. And you might just go, okay, then unless you want to become an epistemological nihilist, where you think no knowledge exists, you will just stop somewhere, and you think that's a realistic, practical place to stop, right? And the same things applies to ethical, moral philosophy. Just like non-moral philosophy, there will be some stopping points. And you may just say that is just ethics. So listen to my language here. The tree exists. Why? What theory explains that? What's the justification behind that? Well, because I'm having a perception. But what about that? What theories justifies that? Where's the principle of sufficient reason explaining that? Well, the correspondence theory. If there's a tree and it corresponds with my senses, that's a good way of saying there's a tree there. That's a sound proposition. That's true. And what about, okay, now you've taken it to the level of correspondence theory of truth. What's the truth behind that? Is there any justification behind that one? And you might just be lost for words at that point. You just don't know, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that is just truth. That's what we mean by truth. I can't go further than that. And in the
Or you
same
become a
language,
coherentist, basically, right?
yeah,
Coherence. You believe in coherence theory, basically.
coherentism. Yeah, you
Anyway,
might
yeah, I
think,
just didn't want to throw it, but I just wanted to bring back to the discussion that Hijab is having with this guy, right? And so one of the things when he started talking about,
before you go though, yeah, it could be coherentism, or it could be foundationalism, or unless,
yeah, it could be foundationalism or coherentism,
or it could be,
you know,
you might think there has to be a backward regress of eternal justifications that has to be each one known, right? There has to be a theory behind the correspondence theory of truth, and there has to be.
yeah,
But what about that one? Where's the justification
right,
behind that
yeah. I
one?
mean, all
You have
those
an
are worthy
infinite
of
regress.
consideration,
Yeah,
basically. Yeah,
yeah.
I think, yeah,
Yeah.
true.
So point is, either you have infinite regress, or you're going to have coherent, like a circular loop. Yeah, the tree exists because it fits my correspondence theory, and correspondence theory is true because the tree exists, right? Or you might end up with
Exactly,
foundationalism,
exactly.
where you stop. Like that
Yeah,
correspondence theory is just the rock bottom, and the same
right,
applies
right.
to ethics, right? Now, if not non-moral, I'm pretty sure Hijab is fine with accepting non-moral philosophy stopping points, right? Whether it be God, whether it be, he has to stop at some place, right? Or
And
unless he
why is
believes,
he stopping at some,
yeah,
God and not some other place? That's a question I think
yeah, that's a question.
an
I'm not
atheist
bothered
or
about
a
that.
non-theist could ask, basically, pretty
Yeah,
much, right?
yeah. So my point is, his pressure on the atheist to keep justifying his ethical framework um, 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 wouldn't make sense if he himself doesn't justify everything in his non-moral philosophy, because he has some sort of stopping point, maybe some necessary truth or something like that, or he may. I'm sure he doesn't go down the infinite regress of justification route, right? And he doesn't either. So it's either something necessary he thinks that is, or something foundational, or some sort of coherentism. He probably
Yeah,
accepts
I
that as
think
well.
he's one of those ones who thinks that infinities can't exist. I think so, but I could be wrong.
No, yeah, I think that's correct. So, so in the same sense, I think the atheist can just bottom out somewhere as well with ethics, and it might be some sort of coherentism, or it might be some sort of foundationalism that might
Right,
be
right.
necessary. And as I've said in the past, I think you can say that ethics are analytical truths, and yeah, that's how I would argue it. And I think that Blue Atheist was going down that path. If you listen to him, he was about to say the same thing. That's the same thing for any philosophy. You have a perception and you try to justify it, and then you just if you keep asking questions, you're going to end up with nihilism.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. And one more thing, Madin, where I wanted to go about a minute or two back, was that this whole conversation started with a very one premise that wasn't spelled out but was assumed to be true, and they are talking about moral realism. Pretty much all these theories that they have said, the main theories of uh, ethical systems, pretty much they all assume moral realism, but there are other theories as well, which fall on the other side, non-realistic, moral non-realism, basically, right? There is emotivism, there is non-cognitivism, and all other theories, right? So, but they didn't delve into it as well, and there are probably philosophers, and even probably in today's time there are philosophers, and I think Alex O'Connor is one of those who's an emotivist, I think, right? So people believe in all kind of these moral theories, pretty much, right? Ethical theories, right? Anyway, so shall we shut it down? I think we lost our audience. Maybe we dove way too deep into some of these arguments, basically, right? Maybe coherentism and foundationalism just threw them off.
Maybe, I don't know. It could be the case. But I don't know, if we have some Muslim viewers, then it shouldn't throw you off, because you shouldn't stop at just going, oh, how does just this justify this? How does this, and think you've got a leg up on everybody else, right? Because we're really taking on that seeming challenge and saying, look, if you don't apply the same sort of questioning to anything else, and I don't see why like any other epistemology where you have some foundations, like I have some foundations when it comes to science, for example. I think there is a standard to learn about the world. At some point, if you keep asking me questions about what's the justification behind that, I might just say I don't know. But I don't need to know everything to know that's, like I don't need to know exactly whether or not my senses correspond to reality, actually, to know that my senses do have some correspondence to reality. Meaning, I don't need to know whether I'm a brain in a vat. Yeah, to know that, for example, there is a
how your reasoning faculties are working properly. Basically,
yeah.
If you are an evolved being, I think this is the Plantinga's very famous Eon, right? EAN. Basically.
Kind of, yeah. It's not just Plantinga. It's not just kind of Plantinga. It's just general classical philosophy, Descartes, right?
Right.
So I'm not thinking about it at that level of, because Plantinga has to assume evolution. Forget evolution. Whether evolution is true or not.
Right.
There's a real kind of question that somebody may say that whether or not the tree that I'm detecting is actually out there in the world, right? And you don't need to, and you can keep asking those questions, but you can keep asking those questions about whether your sensory data, whether correspondence theory of truth is actually real, actually valid, whether or not the tree actually exists out there. But that doesn't not being able to completely answer those questions doesn't prohibit you from saying that there is a tree that I'm perceiving, right? Whether or not it's I'm a brain in a vat or not, the perception of
right. I mean, it's this is something that is missed often by when you're having a conversation with theists or religious apologists. They'll say you just can't come to any conclusion, and that's how I deal with it. Basically, that you can come to a conclusion. You can say for sure that this is my conclusion based on whether I am a brain in a vat or maybe a matrix or whatever it is. My perception is similar to yours, then probably we are both maybe in the same brain in a vat, or maybe you are my my brainchild, or maybe we are both in different matrices with a common matrix superimposition or whatever superposition, right? It's a possibility, I think, and I'm not denying that. But then the tree is being perceived by both you and I, whether the reality is a matrix, brain in a vat, or whatever it is. That's what you're perceiving, basically, and that's the truth, kind of, in whatever reality it is. And that's the rock bottom you can go, pretty much.
Yeah. So just to clarify, you can know when I say truth, I don't mean truth with a big T. I mean truth with a small t, in the sense
Yeah.
that
I mean, that's what I mean as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So truth is truth, but by truth, I might bake it into the correspondence theory of truth, or analytic synthetic distinction, things that I observe and things that I know through my reason, something like that. But if you could question the justification behind analytical thinking, or the justification behind things that I sense, that might be a philosophical tomb that can't be dug out, because nobody can really answer it unless you want to become a solipsist or something like that, right? But what I'm talking about,
I totally agree. Yeah.
What I'm talking about truth, I mean by a big small t, in the sense that let's let it be the case that we're stuck in the matrix. Hypothetically, we're not really sure whether we're in the matrix or not. It doesn't really matter, because when I say truth, I'm not trying to say that the tree is really there, mind independently, and we're not brains in a vat. It really is there. What Immanuel Kant said: you can't know the phenomena. You can only have phenomena. You can't know the nomona. The nomona meaning the world as it is, without any perception, without any perceiver.
Perceiver,
right?
observer, basically.
Yeah. You can't crawl out of your brain and look at the world for what it really is. You just stuck with your brain, with your senses. Not even the brain, your senses, because your brain is something that you sense as well, right?
Your brain is covered by a whole lot of filters, basically, and those filters come through your sense perceptions, basically.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to say is even deeper. I'm saying that you sense your brain, right? right? First of all, you have an experience that you have a nervous system, a brain, etc. That can also be
Yeah,
part of
I mean, I'm agreeing with you, but I'm saying that whatever your brain is perceiving is coming through a lot of filters. So
yeah.
what you're getting is not, I mean, it's a different thing that you're talking about. The tree may not be the reality, basically. It might not be the correspondence that you're talking about. You're talking about your sense. But within those sensory system, I'm saying your brain, which is the seat of perceiving, basically, is getting a lot of noise from these filters, basically.
Yeah. So even so, what I'm saying is one step even behind that. I'm saying that yes, I agree that if you mean that your brain has biases and filters in there, etc. Of course, but I'm saying there's one step behind that, right? I'm saying that even the discovery that there is a brain can be part of the brain in a vat, right? So when we say brain in a vat, we don't literally mean a brain in a vat. When we say that,
I see your point. I mean, I see it's you're going even one step further than that. What I
yes,
was talking about, right? Yeah,
this is
totally,
Descartes'
totally, and that's perfectly legitimate inference to have.
Yeah, this is Descartes' problem, right? So
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Descartes said how many things can be part of the illusion, can be false, right? And the brain, the observation that we have a brain can also be false.
can also be false,
Might
right?
be false, right? The fact that we have a brain with cognitive biases, the fact can be part of the matrix. It could be an illusion, a hoax in the matrix itself. It could be that we as people don't have, in the real world, we don't have brains. Yeah, we could,
True that. Yeah, I mean that's if you become a hyper skeptic like Descartes did in his
yeah,
what were those
meditations. Yeah, well, just keep,
meditations, right?
yeah, keep in
Meditations. Then
mind, yeah,
you'll come to that same conclusion, basically,
yeah.
right?
If you
Meditations
keep going
can
down
be.
the hyper skeptical route, right? Yeah, that's correct. Keep in mind, Descartes wasn't a skeptic because he thought you can know about things. He thought God can
No,
rescue things.
he did go into that route to come to the conclusion that at least I exist. That's
Yeah, yeah. But then he also thought, for example, um, with his senses, he can know God exists and God will give him accurate senses.
right.
Right? He thought he could fix that. So his conclusion was that you can't solve the problem of the external world through God,
Right.
right? So he didn't conclude with skepticism. He was just using skepticism as a philosophical investigation, right?
Right. That's what I'm saying. That he used in meditations 1 and 2, he used that skepticism to throw away all the beliefs that he had, and then he
Yes.
came to know that at least I exist.
Yeah. At least I exist, and then he also built up on that and
Then
said that.
built on top of it
Yeah.
everything else,
Yeah,
basically, right?
yeah. He said, at least I exist. And then from that, he thought if he has true and accurate perceptions to know God exists, then God will give him true and accurate perceptions. And if God
Right.
gives him true and accurate perceptions, then he solves the problem of the external world. We're not in a matrix or a brain in a vat. In fact, God ensures that our senses actually correspond to the reality, and therefore the tree really does exist. That's the kind of attitude he took at the end.
Right.
But most philosophers thought Descartes' way of resolving the problem of the external world by engaging in if God exists, then God will give him true and accurate perceptions. And how does he know that God exists? Is through those true and accurate perceptions. Was entirely circular, right?
Right.
He didn't solve the problem. He was still using his sense data. He's still using his senses to get to the conclusion God exists. And if he's trying to solve his problem of senses using his senses, then that is entirely circular. You can't, in other words, you can't again escape your senses to see the world, right? So if he's sensing that there is a God who will give him accurate senses, it could be part of the illusion as well that there is a God. So part of the matrix again, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's always the criticism leveled against this methodology that
It's
Descartes
like
did.
Neo.
But anyways, Martin,
Yeah.
it's over 1 hour. So we should, I think, because there's nobody else joining our stream, maybe we should close it. We're at a good place. We had a good, discussion on this area. All right. Anybody who's listening, as you guys know, I always say this towards the end: like, subscribe, and share. We have our English only channel that is, at the rate Unveiling Faith. You can see it in the banner right now. And if you are, capable to support us in any which way, you can do through so with patreon.com/philosapiens or buymeacoffee.com/philosapiens, or via super chats, super stickers, or whatever you have with YouTube, basically memberships and everything else there is to it, right? And if anybody is still willing to join and say hi and talk for 5 minutes, we'll wait for another 30 seconds. And if not, then probably we'll just drop off for the stream and see you again in the next stream. So not quite sure. Link is pinned if you want to have a conversation. Do join. Suhail, you haven't spelled out. I think you're a Muslim, but then I don't know. Are you the one I saw in whose stream was that? Basalat's stream, I think. Were you the one? I'm not quite sure. But I think, yeah, that's about it. Madan, unless you want to add something.
No, it's all right. It's all good.
All right. So, all right, everybody. See you guys in the next stream.